Welcome back, everyone. Tom Nagorski here again with the Asia Society. I don't think I need to keep introducing myself, but it's great to be with you all again. The Asia 21 family, the Asia Society family, joining this summit from more than 40 countries. It's great to have you all with us. Throughout this remarkable virtual summit of the Asia 21 Young Leaders Network, the last 48 hours or so, technology and innovation have come into the conversation in many different ways, small and large, and in many of the sessions that we've already held, all of them under the heading Life After the Pandemic. Now we come to a panel that will focus entirely on this question. Basically, as the world works its way out of the pandemic, will there be silver linings in terms of the role of technology and innovation in the COVID-19 response and recovery work? There is a lot to unpack under that heading. We'll have a terrific group in a moment to tackle it all, and proud to note that this session is an all Asia 21 affair that we've gathered for the conversation. To start with, our moderator is Duncan Clark, Asia 21, class of 2006, founder of BDA Investments. He's been an investor and leading advisor in China's dynamic technology and consumer sectors for 2 decades now, more than 2 decades. Duncan is a globally recognized expert on entrepreneurship in China. He's lived and worked in Beijing and Shanghai for more than 20 years, an early advisor to leading China internet entrepreneurs, including Jack Ma. Although, as Duncan will remind you, I'm not sure he was going to do this tonight, but he turned down a chance to get a big early stake in a little company called Alibaba. That said, Duncan Clark is the author of Alibaba, the house that Jack Ma built. It is a great, great read. Even if you're not interested in the tech world, it's just a great book about China. And Duncan is a global trustee of the Asia Society. Great to have him with us. Joining Duncan for the conversation, as I said, 3 other alums of the Asia 21 Young Leaders Network. Nanxi Liu, class of 2016, CEO and co-founder of Enplug, the #1 open digital signage software company used by Fortune 500 firms, banks, hospitals, manufacturing facilities, and universities. She was an Asia Game Changer West awardee in 2020. And if you have a keen eye on the Hop-In platform here, you will see a lovely piano in the background. She is a brilliant classical pianist as well. Mitchell Pham joins us from New Zealand, Asia 21, class of 2008. He's a tech innovation entrepreneur and technology industry leader. Also founding chairperson of the Digital Council for New Zealand, co-founder and director of the Augen Software Group in New Zealand, and Kiwi Connection Tech Hub in Vietnam. Last but not least, Stephanie Tsai, Asia 21, class of 2019, is a technology entrepreneur, founder of Thinking Machines, a tech firm that helps organizations make better decisions by building AI, artificial intelligence tools, and data platforms, working with various sectors, including the civic sector, government, and academic institutions. Her company has grown to become Manila's top data science firm. Again, wonderful group, what we used to call in television, where I once worked, a powerhouse roundtable. Glad to have you with us. Over to Duncan Clark now, our moderator. Take it away, Duncan.
Thank you, Tom. And thanks for reminding me about my decision on Alibaba. That's very helpful. But it shows us that technology can change in unexpected ways, unpredictable ways. Even those of you who follow the Alibaba drama, the recent Ant, fintech drama, means that nobody can predict the future in technology. But that's what we're going to try and do here today. Our topic is silver linings. We like to say every cloud has a silver lining, but every silver lining has a cloud is another way of looking at it. And before we get into our, who we are connected around the world using technology, which is chatting before with Mitchell and Stephanie and Nanxi, I think it's good that we start with the cloud. What is the challenge? Who is not connected? How are we going to deal with the people who are not connected? Because all of these solutions, we're going to cover them. How we stay connected, how we do business from home, how we innovate in vaccines, et cetera, enabled by technology. That's all great. But let's not forget who is not connected. And so I wanted to start with Stephanie, one, because you're the most recent class, and so technology favors the youth. And also, you have some thoughts, I think, on infrastructure. And then we'll move to Mitchell and Nanxi, and then we'll open it up. The floor is yours.
Yeah, Thanks, Duncan. For some context for the group, I've been, my company and I, Thinking Machines, we've been working with the Department of Health in the Philippines to build their COVID test data warehouse. And we've been working with the Asian Development Bank in the Philippines to also help them analyze last mile access and how do we continue to develop given that COVID is the new normal in the Philippines. So we're actually the laggard in Southeast Asia. I think we have our GDP has contracted 10% over the last year, whereas everyone else has been experiencing contractions of maybe 2 to 5%. And what we've really observed is that one, COVID has been exacerbating existing digital divides, mostly when development organizations and the National Economic Development Council thinks about growth. They think about access and development. They think about last mile access to physical infrastructure like roads, farm to market roads, for example. But now that everything has to go digital with COVID, this huge blind spot when it comes to telecommunications access, digital access, it's now really opened up a gap in education, in access to financial technologies. So just to illustrate, the 5 poorest cities in the Philippines, their average internet speed is about 4.6 Mbps. The 5 richest have an internet speed of 25.6 Mbps. That's 5 times higher. And those are for people who already have access, right? So 15% of Filipinos who live more than 2 kilometers away from major roads. So these are the people who live at the last mile. They don't have sufficient access for digital education. But they kind of like flip that over a little bit, right? It means 85% of people who live at these like most remote pieces of the Philippines have some access to digital and have easier access to digital than they do to physical infrastructure. So it also points to this really interesting opportunity to, you just get so much more from your investment if you invest in telecommunications and digital access versus road access. In terms of the work we're doing for the Department of Health, right? The DOH was using spreadsheets to manage their health data systems in March and had never done anything on the cloud. And so my team stood up a data warehouse for them to handle their testing, 200,000 COVID tests per day at that capacity within 2 weeks. And that's not something you could have done with an on-premise data system. That's not something you could have done purely on Excel spreadsheets. So I think that that is a double-edged sword of digital technologies and cloud technologies.
Thank you for that. And Mitchell, we were just chatting earlier, this is not a problem confined to fast-growing emerging markets, developing markets. It's also a big problem in what we call industrialized countries as well, including New Zealand, in terms of the access.
Absolutely, Duncan. I think I'm not, I know of a country that is excluded from some of these challenges. So New Zealand is supposedly a very developed nation. We're even a member of the Digital Nations group of countries. And that's really exciting, very, very exciting. I wear a number of hats, and for example, I chair the tech industry and I also chair the fintech industry group. And so most of my time is spent, focused on the real positive opportunities to innovate, to digitize industry, and business, faster. I advise government on innovation and digital advancement. So that's all really exciting stuff. But at the same time, the statistics show that in New Zealand, 1 in 5 or 20% of our population are currently digitally excluded, in one or more ways, whether or not they don't have access, or they do have access to connections, but they don't have the device, or they have device and connection, but they don't have the skills to be able to use the device or the apps, or in some cases, people don't have enough trust in either the technology or the institutions or the government agencies behind the technology solutions in order to actually trust and use those things, and therefore they end up being excluded. So there's quite a wide range of reasons why, even in developed nations, there are many who are excluded. The hat that I wear, as the chair of the Digital Council for New Zealand, is where we sit in the middle and we connect what the government's doing with what industry is doing and with what communities are trying to do as well, connecting all the dots kind of and make sure that the motto that we have for the Digital Council is that as New Zealand accelerates in its digitization to become a digital nation, that we leave no one behind. Now, none of this is actually negative at all. It is simply the current situation that we can take stock of. And the good news is we know exactly which communities are currently, suffering from digital exclusion. So that way we know exactly who to work with and what we can do. And so it's just a matter of making sure that as we advance, for example, New Zealand, following the success of the UK and Australia in open banking, we are trying to do the same. So, as chair of the fintech community, very excited about the progress and I can't wait to see it moving faster. But at the same time, wearing the hat of the chair of Digital Council, I want to make sure that industry and government take a little bit of time to look at how, if we were to implement digital open banking for our economy, how do we make sure that those who are currently excluded can actually be part of that advancement as well, so that we don't widen the gap when it comes to wealth and commerce.
Thank you. And I love the birds in the background. I mean, we want a lot of tweets on this panel. Sorry, but Nanxi, Nanxi,
I apologize for those in the northern.
What? No, actually, what are we hearing? It's very interesting. Is that a kookaburra or something?
We have a lot of native birds coming out in New Zealand at the moment because it's summertime. So I apologize for those of you who are.
Oh, we love it. It's great. We've all got closer to nature this year. So Nanxi, from your perspective, I mean, first we talk about the cloud and then we'll move the silver lining. What are you seeing the challenges where you are?
Yeah, I think about these challenges in some broad categories. We have the education accessibility, where you have low income students that have less access to great resources and technology and education tools because they might not have access to the best broadband internet connections. And then I think about it from healthcare perspective. Who is getting access to the best healthcare and who is able to get their annual checkups during this year? And then finally, I also think about related to health, the food access that we think about for some of our young kids and our young students in America, that a lot of them are on the free lunch program and they rely on their schools to provide them a meal per day. At the same time, I think there's a lot of fantastic innovation that's been catalyzed through this the COVID environment that I think is going to positively impact all of these three big concern areas, ones that I'm involved with, ones that I deeply care about and work in. So we can talk about the education piece. So for example, I sit on the board of an organization called After School All Stars. We provide free after school programs to low income students, 92,000 students every year. And so for the LA schools that we work with, for example, we partnered with a tech company to actually give gift cards to all of those families that otherwise, their students are going to after school programs because their parents aren't home, they're working, right? And so we actually gave them gift cards to use for groceries. It was immediately addressing what is something that they're missing out on right now. Most of those students in the free after school programs, they're also on the free lunch program. And so it's thinking about moving forward, how do we also ensure and connect all of these different resources, whether it's, what are the activities they're doing after school? Because the wealthy kids, they'll have plenty of activities they're doing, their whatever kind of organizations or private lessons for XYZ. But for the low income students, it's making sure that it's not just thinking about how are they spending their time during the school day, but it's outside of it that also really makes an impact. On the healthcare side, of course, we also see the problems where the vaccine cold chain, Moderna's vaccine in the US has to be stored at negative 20 degrees Celsius. The Pfizer vaccine needs to be stored at about negative 73 degrees Celsius. Well, that means places that don't have infrastructure or small clinics that don't have the refrigeration storage for that, they're going to get these vaccines and they may have to get those vaccines and put them to use in a very short amount of time that they might not be able to do it in, and you waste a lot of vaccines. And so this is a problem that we've known for a really long time. But during this pandemic, it's been at the forefront. Okay, now that you've created this vaccine, how do you distribute it? How do you get it to not just developed countries, but developing nations that don't have that infrastructure? So for my company, I'm co-founder of Nanxi Liu Bioscience, where we develop polymers that eliminate the need for refrigeration for temperature-sensitive proteins like vaccines. And so during this time, of course, we're working with the COVID vaccine manufacturers and companies. But in this process, lots of companies that have other temperature-sensitive vaccines, like we're working with a company that said, actually, we didn't know about you guys until you're doing this work with COVID vaccines, but we have an Ebola vaccine that we're working on. So we actually want to be able to apply this technology for that. So I think you're seeing a lot of technology and innovation that's happened this year that now will get adopted faster. And then finally on the food access piece, I think that there's a lot of organizations out there that is prioritizing making sure that the young kids are being fed, whether it's nonprofit, not NGOs that are working on it, but you're also seeing a lot of for-profit companies stepping up and giving back. For example, e-commerce is doing very well. And there's a number of e-commerce companies that have said, actually, for every product that you buy, we're actually going to be giving back to the community. There's a company that I invested in where they're doing just that. They're a kitchenware company. It's all about food. And for them, it's saying, hey, when you buy our product, you get to cook. We're a higher end product. We understand that. And we also understand the importance of giving back to communities where right now access to healthy food is something that they struggle with. And so I think across the board, yes, we see the problems, but I think you're seeing lots of organizations and companies and individuals stepping up.
Thanks, Nanxi. I think you really framed it very well. I mean, the most important things in life, we're talking about, obviously there's housing, there's schooling, there's health and food, and this crisis is bringing everything together and showing the challenges. And one of the things you're talking about, the role of the private sector and amazing, philanthropy and entrepreneurs stepping up. But it also, again, the cloud versus the silver lining reveals some of the failings of governance, right, across different developed countries, that these problems have been allowed to occur and that are now, being seen very clearly. What do you think when we look at the role of the private sector, and particularly technology companies? How do we look at the role of, let's call them big tech, versus government? What kind of partnership, what kind of rivalry, what kind of, compromise maybe will come out of this between, the power of technology that we're all experiencing, and in some cases, the failures of government? How do you see that playing out? Maybe I'll start with Stephanie.
Oh, hello.
Yep, you're here.
Sorry, I had a bit of a internet connectivity break there.
Oh, right. Well, that's good. You proved our point. We made this on purpose.
Sorry. So when it comes to government response to it, and Duncan, I might have to ask you to repeat the last two sentences.
Yeah, no, I mean, the role of big tech. I mean, I don't know what the debate is in the Philippines. Obviously, the big Western companies. You can talk also in China about the big Chinese companies, but everywhere we're all realizing how dependent we are on big tech companies for these platforms, for of course, for e-commerce, for education. Is this a healthy reliance? Is this a good thing? What can government do to nudge or control tech companies in the right direction? In some cases, we see some rivalry. We see government getting jealous of the power of technology.
Well, I think in the Philippines, the dynamic is pretty interesting because we're a Facebook nation. There are more Facebook accounts in the Philippines than there are people living in the Philippines. And we used to be SMS nation, and everybody jumped the digital. Nice. Everybody migrated onto Facebook. We got free basics here. And that has actually driven a lot of political unrest in the Philippines. The dynamic of just politics in the Philippines the landscape has totally changed. The way you reach out to people has completely changed from on-ground campaigning to campaigning via Facebook. And I'm going to say Facebook specifically, not even social media in general, because Facebook is the only, in many cases, it's the only type of content you can access for free in rural areas in the Philippines. So that leads us to this dynamic where a lot of the things that maybe I'm thinking of the U.S. here. A lot of the things that like American senators are coming after Facebook for, a lot of the dynamics of driving polarization, driving engagement over anything else, and so very much oriented towards conspiracy theories, let's say. That happens here in the Philippines like times 5 or times 10. Our government is not really capable of, we have politicians who are using Facebook. I wouldn't say we have a good system or just even a mechanism for putting political guardrails around the way Facebook is used in the Philippines. So that's on the political side, right? Now, on the more economic side, there's this fascinating dynamic where e-commerce in the Philippines has really blown up in the last 8 months. Our biggest financial GCash, our biggest digital wallet service, they have done more. They've done more turnover in the last 8 months than they have in the last 4 years of their existence. So that really says something about how e-commerce is really holding up our local economy here. But even in that case, our government's ability to manage technology, it's pretty poor. We were at the point at which our regulators had actually driven out a very promising motor transit, digital transit company because they were trying to micromanage surge fees. So this would be angkas in the Philippines. And it is truly, but it's such a truly mixed bag because you have the transit departments and their inability to manage or regulate technology well on one end, and you have the Bangko Sentral, the Central Bank of the Philippines, is doing a really fantastic job managing financial technologies and crypto technologies, which is really big in the Philippines because the Philippines has one of the largest overseas foreign worker economies in the region, where we have I think at least 10% of our GDP comes from remittances, Filipinos living abroad. So the Bangko Central's ability to and motivation to smartly regulate remittances, overseas foreign finances for us is very high, and their capacity and capability is pretty high. It's, I would say, truly a mixed bag in a developing nation. Not something where we must get better, but I don't have a lot of confidence that we will get very much better at it.
Thanks. And moving to Mitchell, I mean, that's part of your role, right? Is to kind of bridge the gap, I guess, between the digital and the government.
Absolutely, Duncan. I agree with everything that's been shared so far, and I would like to kind of add a little bit from the innovation perspective. I think both big tech and the government have a significant role to play because they can actually make a huge impact in being the platform and I guess help advance the ecosystem for smaller businesses and smaller tech firms to digitize and to innovate. I think, you know, when I look at the New Zealand government, I say that, you know, they have the ability to influence the ecosystem in ways that, you know, private organizations, no matter how large, can actually influence. And so making sure the government is connected to what is it that businesses need to advance digitally, or small tech firms need to further their innovation. Because most of the most brilliant innovations that come out of New Zealand are actually from small, agile businesses, not the large, big, you know, heavy size tech firms, you know. And then the many big tech firms in New Zealand. Also, this other dynamic with New Zealand being a small economy, many of the big tech firms here are actually, you know, multinational big techs. So I think for those, you know, foreign firms who have an interest in the New Zealand market, it is also important that they recognize that they have the ability to help shape and nurture and grow innovation in this particular economy, and that will. It might seem counterintuitive to some of these firms that, why would they foster local innovation to compete against, them as big giants? But in fact, the local innovation actually help them to actually accelerate their own innovation as well, with a lot of these great ideas coming out of small New Zealand businesses.
Great. Nanxi, return to you, and then we're going to take some questions from the digital floor.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. How much should government and big tech work together versus sometimes when they're in conflict? So I sit on the board of a publicly traded company, and one of the questions that we always think about is actually how much government and private industry for the big companies are aligning more and more. Actually, I think the ultimate goal is, if you look at companies on NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange, some of the discussions are all around corporate social responsibility, ESG, so environmental, social, and corporate governance. So thinking about not just how does this go into our bottom line and provide shareholder value, but it's thinking about it and reframing it in stakeholder. How does this provide value to our stakeholders? And I think for a lot of the large companies, certainly publicly traded companies, that is a discussion that is being had in the boardroom, which is thinking about, okay, how do we make sure that we're making the positive impact? Because with information so readily available and so much more data and access to data, it's easy to actually look at company and whether they're caring about their stakeholders or not. It wasn't like before where they could hide things, but now it's very much a lot more out in the open, maybe not as much as we still want it to be, but much more so today, that the interest of the success of a private company, a large one, big tech, and government, which is wanting to provide and ensure that the public is safe and is protected and is making sure that the big tech companies aren't taking advantage of the public. I think that's just becoming more apparent, and I think interests are going to be more aligned. And I think it's about having those conversations where it's less so about being in conflict. When there is conflict, it's is it that the regulation is too aggressive? Is that why some of these big tech companies are pushing back? I think in general, some of the regulation, I don't think that the big tech companies are necessarily like, that's awful, that is terrible, but it's rather actually, I think there's a better way of approaching. If the end goal for a government is trying to account for X or trying to push for X, there's other companies that might say, actually, there are better approaches. So in general, I think there's going to be more alignment on kind of getting to the end goal.
Interesting. And as we are the Asia Society, it's interesting to think, I mean, like Mitchell's in New Zealand, you're pretty much free to travel around New Zealand. I'm free pretty much to travel around mainland China. We could add into that, Taiwan and until recently South Korea. But, there's sort of a shift in how governments in Asia have performed generally versus, the incumbents in the West. Why is that? Is there better literacy in government, whether it be a democratic or non-democratic system? Is it more investments in infrastructure? What are the lessons learned? I mean, are these lessons being learned by the West or not? Just feelings before we move to some of the floor. It's kind of interesting to think about Asia's role in this, coming out of this crisis. Anybody wants to weigh in?
Well, I think in the US, there's so much emphasis on freedom and individual rights for the US government to say, everyone, you have to stay in. You literally can't go out. And there's contact tracing for the average American. It's unthinkable that I would be required to have an app on my phone that will track every person I've come in contact with. But if we wanted to minimize it and we wanted to really do the best job possible, that would have been the method. But it kind of goes against almost the natural ethos of America. Whereas I think in Asia, there's less of that. It's more, I think, given SARS and other things in the past, which is no, you make the sacrifice now. The personal sacrifice, you're going to have a lot of your freedoms taken away for the betterment of the general population.
We heard that with our opening keynote from our fellow, about Taiwan's approach. Please, yes, go ahead, Mitchell.
Thank you. Actually, on an experience that I have directly and in Ho Chi Minh City, in the same business that we all kind of work to, and it's been fascinating to see yes, right through the different phases of COVID. Both of these countries, both of COVID fairly well. Fundamental difference that I've observed is that the New Zealanders, and we live in an individualistic culture where the individual rights are very, very important over other things. And then we start live, and so I think the kind of the what the collective needs kind of comes first. And neither is right or wrong. It's just very kind of fundamentally different in culture. And I think to deal with COVID effectively, or to deal with anything effectively, I think it's important that we understand this fundamental difference in culture so that we can kind of work with that to achieve the same outcome. We might have to take two different paths.
Great. Thanks. Sorry, I got most of that. Maybe the birds were using a lot of bandwidth with their tweets, but I don't know, it was just on my side. It was, but we got the message there. And I think, yeah, the difference of cultures across, as you said, the markets we're discussing, and also we talked about the difference of cultures in a way between government and tech companies in the private sector. And we have some questions coming in on that. I mean, one specifically is, and they're kind of related. Basically, what are the top three things that could be done to reduce tech equity by companies, organizations? What can we do? Or is it government?
One of the things that we've done in our company, I think I really encourage other companies to do this. We give each employee has a budget every single year. We actually increased it 5x this year in terms of whatever nonprofit that they want to give to. So there's a lot of companies that have the matching program, but for us, we didn't want to do the matching program. We just straight give money to our employees to give, because matching, sometimes you just have to get accustomed to it. And so for us, we wanted to make it as seamless as possible for employees, that we're saying, hey, here's money, and it has to be used to donate to nonprofit organizations that you care about. And during this year, we gave some recommendations. Here are organizations and themes that we think are really important. But at the end of the day, it is up to the individual employee to determine how they want to spend that. And so I think, without getting the government to require companies to do this, I think the private sector can just step up themselves. And I think it's really from the founders and the executives to say, we're going to do this. This is going to not only help our community around us, but it actually is helping build our own internal culture that at the end of the day will help the company's bottom line too.
Right, so donations. Mitchell, you were going to weigh in on this as well?
Yes, sure. I guess just probably the top key point from me would be to make sure that government is connected across everything they do, because different government agencies trying to do good, not talking to each other, are often, leaving gaps behind them or in between them. So that there's that, connection within government, but also connection between government, industry, and community. Private sector does a lot of good things and a lot of innovation, and the community sector, there's a whole lot of project initiatives going on. And so often there's a lack of kind of awareness and visibility and cohesiveness. And there's also a lot of opportunities for synergies and so forth that kind of left, that are kind of wasted. So I would definitely advocate for making sure that we connect the dots across those three domains.
And Stephanie, Manila, we had a great Asia 21 gathering in Manila a couple of years ago, and it was amazing to see the talent, the energy, and the actual achievements of the entrepreneurs there. But you're facing a challenge, right, with government on one side, a kind of distant Facebook, a lot of entrepreneurs. How do you act in this case? How do you prioritize for equity?
For equity, I think that the perspective that I've taken, right, is bringing in the third party, right, which is the civic sector, the citizens. Ultimately, technology companies, we work for our customers. Government works for citizens. And when they don't have a strong voice, when they're pretty quiet, you then end up in this dynamic where this is a pretty adversarial dynamic between the tech companies and the government agencies, where government agencies talk about how how tech companies are too experimental, try too many things, like break everything. And from the tech company side, government regulators are too slow, too inefficient. They don't talk to each other. But once you bring in the voice of the civic sector, you do have like a stronger it kind of balances out the equation, right? So my team, we do a lot of work with open source, building open source libraries, opening up government data sets, working on transparency initiatives. Open data is like the bedrock of a strong open data, free press, kind of transparent conversation that is the bedrock of like a working civic society that we all live in. And I think once you have citizens in the room, right, they then advocate for the tech companies when we do things like make their lives like easier and more convenient. We make payments easier. We make transit easier. We really do a lot to improve the lives of people. And on the other side of the equation, they can kind of they're the stakeholder whose voice we most often do not hear because when an individual has let me put it this way. If you think about incentives, companies are incentivized to bottom line, make money. Governments are theoretically incentivized to help their citizens, but if they're too distant, if they don't talk to the citizens, that's like, then they end up being incentivized to win elections, just like politically. So once you have the citizens in there, and they're actually not incentivized to the same degree, right? Because every individual, you're kind of like, well, maybe I should get involved in the local election, but I have so many other things to do. Why would I do that? Like, how does that benefit me as an individual? That at the individual level, it's just like the incentive is too small. But once you get an aggregate of people in the room, then that becomes such a powerful like voice and counterweight. So in spaces that are becoming more authoritarian, those are the voices that vanish first.
Yeah, I was just on before this call. It was a Pan America Gala dinner, you know, the literature and human rights organization, and Barack Obama was addressing, and he used this term, truth decay. You know that because this reliance, you know, on misinformation by authoritarian governments, and you know, he was obviously talking about the U.S. as well. You know, we need some digital flossing and digital. Toothpaste to address these issues. I love that term. So, what can we do, in our individual lives, do you think, in terms of the people around us that can make the biggest impact, as well as the corporate approach? What messaging?
Man, I would even say get involved with, it seems so small, but getting involved directly with local government is very powerful, like unexpectedly powerful. No amount of signing online petitions is as powerful as showing up. I've shown up to like a barangay, like city hall, public stakeholder. They have these like open sessions. And when you show up, you then quickly realize that you are the only new person they've seen in the last 6 months. That there's only 5 other people in the room that represent like the greater public, and that 4 of those people, or like 3 of those people, are people who do not represent you necessarily, because they're people with more time. Either they're retirees, or they're like political junkies, or people who are related somehow to the government, and so they have like more of an incentive to show up. So it's really weird. But when you show up in that room, they are so happy to see you. They will literally like take down your comments, and you then see your comments like show up in. And it might seem so small, right? But you're like neighborhood association. What does the neighborhood association do? And just that practice of showing up to municipal and local and municipal stakeholder sessions and participating more actively than voting, like truly showing up in that way, I think does a lot more than people imagine.
We have one other question, unless the others want to weigh in on that, my rather general question there. Quite interesting, from the audience. Is there any innovation you see that concerns you, like things that have happened as a result of the pandemic that actually may be having negative side effects? It's a kind of interesting angle, again, on this cloud versus the silver lining. Like what if we accidentally or intentionally, unleashed? It's an interesting question. It may not be easy to answer. Please, Mitchell.
I might just answer from one particular perspective. And I think through the COVID period, we see masses of kids, moving on to learning online via digital platforms, and then doing everything online, so there is a massive risk in terms of digital safety, because the time frame is so condensed. I think we've overlooked a whole bunch of things that are to do with digital safety. And it's not just for kids; it's for adults as well, and also it's for our elderlies as well, who are kind of suddenly thrust into this whole digital world that they now have to live in. And there's other things like digital bullying and things like that happening. Right. And so there are many concerned parents around, and they're not quite sure whether or not how much digital should they actually allow their kids to kind of be. So there's I'm just throwing some questions out there that highlight some risks, I guess, as part of the answering your question.
Sure. I mean, the old saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Maybe it's also paved now with good internet connections. Be careful what we wish for. Nanxi, from your perspective in LA, you're dealing with both, disadvantaged communities and the most advantaged, and they're being disproportionately affected in different ways, right, by this shift to tech. What do you see? I
think that it's going to really exacerbate the income inequality gap that we see and the education accessibility gap. I think that some of the students that don't have access, they're literally going to be a year behind their peers that have resources, if not more. And I think from those families too, now it's also nutrition and health damage that they will experience greater than their peers. I think another negative that's really happened that is unfortunate is the politicization of things that shouldn't be political. I think things about public health and best measures for public health, vaccines, et cetera, really shouldn't become political. And whether you're left or right, then that's the position you take. I think some of this has become very dangerous where I think combating any kind of future global issues, this politicization. And I think that's something that was unfortunate that happened this year.
That's a really important point when you think about this impact. Every day that goes by, the kids are not back in school, or some are on digital or not. I mean, it's a bit like those demographic charts. You go back and see the impact of World War I or World War II on populations, where you saw this, permanent damage effectively. That's going to be a big concern. And I feel it now amongst, friends who are, have kids in schools here, which are active and not in the, in the West. And it's really interesting to think about, how do we address that gap? It may be a long-term, competitiveness issue for those countries that take a long time to come out. And as we heard on the vaccine, obviously we have the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is supposedly 70% effective, which will be very helpful, more applicable in countries without the cold chain. But it's, still the numbers show that it's going to be years for everybody to get this. And so you're right. It's really about the exacerbation. I mean, tech is all about scaling, but that, what if you're on the bit that doesn't scale? It seems like we're learning the power of tech. That's pretty clear. I think we're almost out of time. I want to check back in with Tom and Sanjeev, unless the other panelists have any other comments. Maybe I'll just invite you some conclusions on what we've been discussing.
I think you have time, probably about 7 or 8 more minutes.
Oh, great. Even a bonus. Okay. So we'll start from my top, which is Nanxi down. I mean, everybody has different, that's another challenge of this thing is we never know where to look and what to point. But in my case, it's upper right, which is there. It's even back to front for me to point. Nanxi.
Yeah, I think my takeaway from this, so I have a little sister who's 18 years old. She just started her freshman year in college. She's living in the dorms, but all the coursework is online, and they get COVID tested twice a week. All of the students in the dorm, right? This is a very different type of freshman year than any other kind of freshman going on any other year. And I think the thing that I emphasize to her during this time, and it's something that I want to make sure is the test of the human spirit. And you as an individual, it's tested right now during these hard times. Maybe we are lucky in that we're not as heavily impacted than other communities, right. But lots of people, they're literally going through the hardest times that they've ever experienced as a family and as a community. And it's, okay, are you just sitting at home? You get to work from home and do whatever you do, or are you proactively going and giving your resources, whether that be monetary or time, in supporting organizations that are helping those that are struggling right now, this is the ultimate test. It's not just for individuals, but organizations as well. And so that's something I tell her, yes, you get to go to college right now. You are so lucky to be able to receive that kind of education. You get to be safe in your dorms. Okay, you can focus on your own studies, but you also have to really think about what's happening right now, because you don't want to look back years down the road. It's like, oh, I was a freshman, I was just sitting in my dorm. If you have free time, don't watch Netflix. As much as I love Netflix, it's okay, what can you do to help communities? And one of the things I remember reading about is boredom helps with creativity. So when we're sitting around bored, we start reflecting, and because we're so used to having something catch our attention, watching, there's always some kind of on-demand content. Instead, actually just sitting back and thinking, okay, what can I do, might actually spur some of the best ideas that we'll have.
That's fantastic. Mitchell, you're next on my little box order. We hear the birds, we can hear you.
Yeah. Great, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, sorry. So just a quick reflection from New Zealand. I think we are very fortunate here that we could have a lot of the normalities in our lives and our work and everything else. But I think there are two things that I would like to highlight. I think the first thing is that there are still significant gaps, even in such a place as New Zealand. And there's still a lot of disconnects, a lot of gaps, a lot of things that if left unattended could exacerbate further the equities gaps within our society that still exists. That's the first point. So we can't rest on our laurels. But the second point is also of equal concern, is that whilst we go about and do what we do here in New Zealand, our borders are still closed. And I don't think we can keep our borders, or should keep our borders closed for too long, because we need to really continue on this journey with the rest of the world. And so there must be ways for different countries at different stages of their COVID journey to be able to engage with each other. And I think that's something that I would love to see as a conversation, especially across our region, the Asia Pacific region, where there pre-COVID there was so much activities and trade and travels and everything else that made the region very, very strong. And I think to be strong again, we need to start to work together again, rather than just stay within our close borders.
Yeah, I experienced coming back I was in France for 8 months and coming back into quarantine in Tianjin. I didn't really need the mask anymore, but I needed the VPN to get on the internet. So it's an interesting trade. But Stephanie in Manila.
Yeah. So for me, a couple of things, right? So the firstly, there's no later for individuals or for organizations. So I've been active in the civic data sector in the Philippines for almost the last 10 years. And so there are a lot of people who say, do it slowly, do it incrementally, let's do it later, let's wait until this next election happens, let's wait until this next party happens. And all of a sudden in 2020, there is no later. Like it's now or never. And so everybody's been forced into this period of like very deep self-reflection. Even people who are usually pretty, I'm not going to say that word. People who
we know who you're talking about. We know the type.
yeah, that type of organizations, right? And so everybody had to either retire or change. Everybody had to like quit, retire, or change, and it's actually been like very, very dynamic and very invigorating because again, like Nanxi was saying, the push to look around and say like, okay, how can I be creative? How can I improve to be better and help the people around me? And organizations being forced to think about, I must change the way I address my citizen stakeholders. I have to, if I have to give out 10,000, if I've had to update people every single day, 10,000 people, their test results on like same day basis, I must switch to a cloud and digital. There's no choice. You have to do it. So that's been like pretty invigorating. I hope to see that change and that spirit can carry through over the next 5 years. And the second big thing is that it's digital acceleration, right? all companies and all organizations push through it, and they're scaling massively. If they're surviving, they're scaling. So if you are in e-commerce, you are massively scaling in the Philippines right now. If you're providing digital services over digital healthcare services, digital banking services, everything's now like digital community, everything's blowing up. But the question with scaling is, what are you scaling? You're scaling access on one hand, but on the other hand, I think where there needs to be more emphasis is thinking about how we scale community. It already happens, right? Social media drives polarization of opinion. It drives polarized communities. And I don't think of that as like a binary challenge, right? It's either you're on digital and exposed to polarization, or you're not on digital and you're not exposed. I don't think that's true. I think all communities are cultivated, created. I kind of grew up online in an era where everybody was using like screen names, right? But I was genuinely involved in I'm going to just say it. It's a little bit embarrassing, but I was really into Neopets, and that's how I learned how to code. Yeah, Nancy. That's how I learned HTML. That's how I learned how to operate with the web, by being a like 8-year-old on Neopets and talking to people there, like people who were, I don't know how much older they were than I was, probably like 20 years older, teaching me how to make like a blink tag. And so that was a healthy community for me to grow in, and that was a digital community. Now, right, that everybody is kind of stuck in their own homes, the question of community is changing for I can see this split, right, between older people who've had a chance to develop our relationships, our friendships, our communities, and we are now reaching out, I think, more thoughtfully in making sure that those connections stay. Whereas young people who, my sister's like 19, and she's also just started her freshman year, but she's chosen to stay at home and work for the family business for a year. So her challenge is much more oriented around how does she make new communities outside of the home? How does she grow as a young adult for the first time? And if you're exposed to bad or like polarizing communities online, the path to radicalization, just by following the rabbit hole of YouTube recommendations, the path to radicalization is very straight, clear, and scaled right now. Whereas the path to like, where are the healthy communities that scale, right? I see healthy communities that don't scale online, but I haven't yet encountered a healthy community for growing like the next generation of citizens and just like people. So that's a challenge that I will be continuing to think about, that I think is like really facing us right now.
Really fascinating. So if we need a kind of kale for instead of algorithms, we need something. I love this idea of scaling in communities, and I love the idea also that boredom breeds creativity. We've seen amazing works of art, literature, music created during pandemics through the ages. So I think even this, I think this panel has also shown us, when challenging times bring smart people together in this new way. It's very exciting. At the same time, we've been pretty mindful of the challenges here. And Tom, I mean, from your perspective,
listen, I have, first of all, you started this session, Duncan, by talking about silver linings and clouds. My takeaway after a short hour is I'm just very grateful that it seems to me anyway that the silver linings outweigh the clouds, and that's not something in this year and even in the sessions we've had at this summit that one can say, because we're dealing with depressing stuff, right? I endorse completely what you said, Duncan. I guess you're paraphrasing our former president. Here's to an end to truth decay, right?
Yes.
And Stephanie, your point just now about paths to healthy communities. But really, I just want to say, Duncan, first of all, thank you for leading a great session. You're inspiring as always, and you've also guided a difficult discussion super well. Nanxi, Mitchell, and Stephanie, thanks to the three of you. One of the things I love about Asia 21, and it's been true at every session we had on education just a couple of hours ago in North Korea, is the diversity and the intelligence that we bring to all these conversations, and the fact that every one of the people who's contributing happens to be an alum of the network is just great.
Can I just ask Mitchell to record for 1 minute the birds, and we'll have that as a soothing soundtrack to our lives.
Absolutely.
I have to tee up the next thing, but yes, let's have some birds.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
See you in Japan next year.
Yeah, see you in Japan. And just for everybody in the audience, thanks to you as well. Coming up just momentarily, actually would fit very nicely with the birds that Mitchell has around him. We have a special session on mindfulness and mindful leadership, how appropriate. And after that, as Duncan has just teased, we will have, these aren't the Olympic Games, but we will have our own closing ceremonies as we will send things over in a little over an hour to our colleagues at the Asia 21 chapter in Tokyo, our Asia Society Center in Tokyo. They will take the baton, if you will, as we say some closing words about this summit and gear up for a year from now. But thanks again to all 4 of you. You've been terrific. Stay tuned.
Arigato.
Thank you.
Everyone.